By the end of his 91 years, Bob Williams had altered and elevated British Columbia forever.
Former BC NDP Cabinet Minister Bob Williams has died at the age of 91. Keith Baldry joins us from Victoria with more on this. Keith, he's being remembered for his considerable influence on BC politics.
Oh, it's harder to find a bigger, most important figure in BC politics than someone like Bob Williams. He's right up there with W.E.C. Bennett, Dave Barrett, pivotal member of the 1970s NDP government.
When some of us young pups, and which I was at the time, came in, we felt that we were on the shoulders of great people that had a view of where we had to go. We felt we had a mandate. We were just damn sure we were going to use power well. I was a city kid from the east side, but I became a forest inventory student in a couple of summers working at the Kootenays. And it was indelible for me because it's such ancient times. It was the end of a grand era when paddle wheelers were still on the Arrow Lakes and where there were remittance men, people that I'd never heard of, or men that had been beaten up in the Trout Lake area by grizzly bears. And my God, a kid from the east side of the city seeing this wonderland. So, and then I flew around in a 1927 Junker aircraft, and I was such a naive kid that I had to pull out like a bombardier for food drops to kids in valleys that were on long treks, and I was just too dumb to even know it was dangerous. So the Kootenays just indelible in my mind, even now.
If you're an ICBC customer, Bob Williams was there at the beginning of creating that. If you use ALR land, if you live on the ALR, that's a result of Bob Williams' efforts. Many forestry practices in this province were enacted and created by Bob Williams. A very powerful cabinet minister in the Barrett government. In fact, he was basically the co-premier and the author of so many policies that exist to this day.
Resources Minister, Mr. Bob Williams.
Well, the opportunities were there. The forests were there, the people were there, and the opportunities hadn't been exploited in the best sense of the word. And it was a fortuitous combination of circumstances. We were in the process of building a civil service up from a rusty machine that we inherited as a new government. George Brown had come home from the road, a guy that had learned a lot while he'd been away from his home base and had a hell of a lot to offer. He was a hustler with ideas, and we were ready to listen. It was a unique opportunity of bringing together a new civil service, a new government, of forgotten people that never had a chance in terms of taking part in development in their own communities, and companies that had a certain amount of moxie. What we've come up with is unique for British Columbia.
One of the things we did was build the modern Whistler. Al Rain sent me a note soon after I was minister saying, you got to do something. Blackcomb could be one of the greatest ski mountains there is, and they're going to log the whole damn thing within about 2 months unless you intervene. And he said, I couldn't believe it. A minister that actually read the letters that the people sent to him. And I had a ranger out at his lovely log house within 2 weeks. So out of that, we created the resort municipality of Whistler. We saved Blackcomb. We brought in ski consultants from Colorado and who analyzed the basin. And then we developed the concept of the town center. Well, the rest is history.
Bob Williams played a huge part in making BC's park system what it is today. He was an educated planner and a former Vancouver City Councillor with a strong interest in preserving and managing natural resources. In the early 1970s, Bob Williams served as a cabinet minister in the Barrett government, overseeing lands, forests and water, and recreation and conservation. During this time, he doubled the size of BC's park system, making sure the parks were planned based on the natural environment, and allocated more funding to manage them well. Later, in the 1990s, he advised Premier Harcourt to double the parks again. Because of his efforts, about 15% of BC is now parkland.
Well, installment 2, tell the story about downtown Surrey.
Yeah, so I walked into ICBC, and so I said, where are we investing the reserves? And of course, it was all paper in New York. We'll have to start applying it in the province. Andrew was looking at a university in Surrey, and Surrey had more kids than any place and would continue for decades. So we ended up agreeing that we should have the university in Wally, which was really a suburban slum at the time. So I picked up a somewhat failing shopping center for 30-odd million, but the SkyTrain stations were all nearby, and we optioned the city land next door, and we worked on redesigning it. So we're going to move the head office of ICBC there, a podium, 26 tower, A-class office building. We would change the shopping center, and Ving got this idea of opening it up, building a galleria on top, and the university would be in the galleria, and ICBC would be in the tower. Their call center would be in the podium, and in the peak hours at ICBC, we could hire students. At the time, everybody thought I was nuts. It's the toughest job I've ever had, working with Treasury staff here in Victoria, because they were determined to stop me. And I think you wrote the odd column and said, can't they control this guy?
Yeah.
And the answer was no, they couldn't. And we won it. And since then, the mayor of Surrey now says our $250 million investment has generated $4 billion in new investment in their city centre. A year after we completed the project, it won the prime prize in Cannes, France, for the best project in the world.
I'd like to reflect, now that I am 90 years old.
For a kid from the East Side, it was an extraordinary experience to get to know the countryside, this wild countryside. The profound thing was the human quality and the mix of people in that hinterland. There was that whole interface of people in the forest and the land, and people that cared about it a great deal, that were indelibly intermixed with their environment. The interface between human beings and the natural resources is a terribly important matter. My mentor in my career was Alistair Currar, who was the head of the Environment and Land Use Secretariat in our government, who was the founder of integrated natural resource management in this province. But he always came back to that question. It isn't just this measurement of the science and the physicality of things. It's that human interface and the rest of the environment that you always have to think about.
Very pivotal insider in terms of the NDP, but a very pioneer visionary when it came to creating public policy in this province that exists to this day. This stuff was created back in the 70s. It's still around, ICBC and the ALR. So condolences to Bob Williams' family.
And I was the first East Side guy that had been elected to council in decades. I was a young 31-year-old town planner. And in my own way, I kind of cut a swath up there on the hill. And I was terribly upset at how backward we'd been in some of our planning work. English town planners that dominated City Hall in those days had embarked on a slum clearance program. Gerald Sutton Brown was city manager, and he had been the city planner. And he was quite a kind of a Rex Harrison type. And he wore these Savile Row suits, and I was still a kid from the East Side that didn't talk in terms that he particularly appreciated. And I kept exposing some of the work that these English town planners were doing. I said, where was the social analysis that you carried out to come to these conclusions about this old neighborhood? But he did say to me, you're not going to last here long. You're going to keep moving up, I hope.